Hello and welcome to Historia Pinyarum, a channel dedicated to the history of martial arts and combat sports in the Western world. On this channel, we'll cover the history, key players, and technical developments of arts like boxing, savate, bartitsu, various folk styles of grappling, as well as fencing, single-stick, knife arts, and anything in general that is face-punching or face-punching adjacent from ancient Greece to the modern United States. We'll even offer commentary on recent fights in the world of boxing and mixed martial arts. So for our first video, I thought we'd jump in and dive a little bit into the origins of what's probably my favorite martial art, combat sport, good old-fashioned English boxing. Now, there's kind of a common conception out there that boxing as we know it goes all the way back to antiquity, with the Greeks and the Romans having practiced it. And that's true in a sense, but it's also not quite correct. Boxing was a popular pastime in the Greek and Roman world and a regular fixture of entertainment, but there's no real connection between that sportive lineage and anything that goes on in the modern world. Really, we see boxing practiced as an Olympic sport and an all-around spectator favorite from the classical Greek era towards late antiquity. It sort of gets a rough go on its luck in late antiquity with the Christianization of the Roman Empire, and then kind of fades from the record, and there's sort of a long slumber through the quote-unquote Dark Ages, to use a term I don't care for, all the way through the Middle Ages, and we don't really see anything like the sport we know and love until the mid to late 1600s. You have the emergence in England of fairground fighting booths. These were booths where typically a local champion, for lack of a better term, would hold court against all comers, and the typical format was a single bout of their choosing or a sort of 3-event contest. Often some sort of sword, small sword was popular, single stick or cudgel, and with one of the events being pugilism or boxing. Although boxing in that era is not quite what you would envision, you have something much more akin to modern mixed martial arts in that the rules were far more open. You don't have a prohibition on grappling, kicking, or even in many cases, gouging, hair pulling, biting. Whatever rules existed were really informal gentlemen's agreements made before the fight. One of the first really reliable accounts we get from the time period of a boxing match comes from a popular newspaper at the time called the Protestant Mercury in January of 1681, which I'll quote. "Yesterday a match of boxing was performed before His Grace the Duke of Albemarle, between the Duke's footman and a butcher. The latter won the prize, as he hath done many before, being accounted, though but a little man, the best at that exercise in England." Now, that's a pretty short account. We don't learn anything about the fight, the nature of it, what exactly went on, but there it is, and many close contemporaries, writing in the later 1700s to early 1800s, considered that to be the earliest recorded prize fight on record in England. Roughly around the time this first bout is recorded, the man that would later go on to become boxing's first real star, James Figg, is born. He's born in Thame in England in 1684, although some sources give his birth date as 1695. I really can't figure out what the discrepancy is there, but I think the older date's more reliable. So anyway, Figg is born in 1684. We don't know a lot about his early life, but we know that by the time he appears on the scene as a young man, James Figg is already well known as an excellent swordsman and staff fighter, and is quickly building a reputation as the king of punch, so to speak. He's got quite the reputation as the guy to beat, and we know he's plying his trade at the Southwark Fair pretty regularly in this time period. In fact, by 1719, he's kind of recognized widely as the guy to beat. He's the champion. Now, a note about being champion in this era. There were no belt holders per se. There were no sanctioning bodies, no governing organizations. It was really just sort of an acknowledgement that, hey, you were the top dog. You know, you could sort of declare yourself champion, but usually it was this sort of mutual consensus on the part of the spectating public. Now, around the time that Figg starts to be recognized as the guy to beat, as the first real champion, he gains the patronage of a member of the nobility. The third Earl of Peterborough, Charles Mordaunt, is kind of known as a patron of the physical arts, and he takes a shine to watching Figg give other people shiners. So with the Earl's financial backing, Figg goes on to open up the first real boxing academy that we know of on Tottenham Court Road in London. Now, this is a place where Figg teaches largely members of the aristocratic class, but people from some backgrounds of all sorts, the arts of pugilism, of various swords, and particularly of staff, which is really known as his specialty. Not only is Figg teaching fighters here, but he's also acting as a promoter. We know that he put on quite a few fights and exhibitions in his academy, and it becomes sort of the mecca for punch of that era. Now, Figg's career as a fighter sort of comes to a head in a 3-bout rivalry with a guy named Ned Sutton. Sutton has sort of established himself as the alternate choice to champion here. He's the next best guy. And they fight 3 times, with Figg taking the first bout, losing the second, and unfortunately we don't know a whole lot about those. And then the whole thing comes to a head in this fantastic rubber match, this final fight of the trilogy, that we do have some decent accounts of. We know it was a 3-part event held in 1727, and it had to have been the super fight of its era. We know that all the social luminaries are there, even up to and including the Prime Minister of England. So it's this huge affair. So the fight begins with an exhibition of swordsmanship. And right off the bat, Sutton wounds Figg. Figg dismisses it on a technicality, claims he wounded himself somehow, so it doesn't count. Sutton agrees to let it go. They commence the swordplay again. Figg gives Sutton a pretty nasty wound in the shoulder, and the swordsmanship exhibition is called, and they move to the next portion of the fight, which is the boxing match. Now, Sutton comes out really strong here. He drives Figg off the stage and into the crowd with a body shot. Figg takes the stage again in short order. They trade blows. Figg gets the better of him with a huge flurry, drives him onto the stage, and just sort of pins him. And Sutton agrees to call that portion of the fight, and they move to the third and final portion, which is an exhibition of staff play. And this is real trouble for Sutton because, by all accounts, this is what Figg is accounted best at. And in pretty short order, he smashes Sutton's knee. Sutton concedes the fight, and it's determined that he's actually broken his kneecap. And with that fight, Figg has sort of put the capstone on the pyramid that is his career. It's his biggest victory. His most dangerous threat has been demolished, and he is universally recognized as the guy. He is the absolute champion. He kicks around for another few years from 1727 to 1730. Then he enters a sort of semi-formal retirement until his death in 1734. Now, by the time of his death, Figg has already shepherded in a new generation of fighters that will replace him and take us into the next era of boxing, but that's a story for another day. So where does Figg's life leave us? Well, it's almost impossible to envision the modern sport of boxing without him. I mean, he really instituted so many things that are critical to how we see boxing now. He instituted the first boxing academy, to which we owe all modern boxing gyms. He was really the first pure promoter out there in that sense. And he was also the first recognized champion. I mean, he put down so many things that are pillars of the sport that I just can't quite envision boxing as we know it without the man that was known as James Figg. He's really the pillar upon which it was all built. Technically, maybe not so much. We don't know a lot about how he fought. We just seem to know that he was a really strong, stout guy, that he was very endurant. But you just can't look at what he left behind in any honest sense and say that it's not the foundation that the modern sport is built on. So we'll wrap things up on that note for now. If you enjoyed the video, leave it a like, subscribe, but most importantly, comment. I want to know what you're thinking. I want to know what you liked, what you didn't like, and what you'd like to hear more about. For now, that's me signing off, and remember, protect yourself at all times.